There are some lives that look complete from the outside. A steady routine, a familiar place, days that move forward without much resistance. From a distance, nothing seems broken. And maybe that's why the cracks are hardest to see, because they don't announce themselves. They stay quiet. They wait. This is one of those lives. It begins in a small house on a street that rarely changes. The kind of street where the trees have grown taller than the houses, where neighbors wave but don't always stop to talk, and where evenings settle in slowly, as if they're in no hurry. Every morning, the same routine. He wakes up before the alarm, not because he's eager for the day, but because his body learned long ago not to expect rest. The room is dim, the air still. For a moment, he lies there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of a world that hasn't fully woken yet. There was a time when mornings felt different. He remembers that, though he doesn't think about it often. Back then, waking up came with anticipation, or at least curiosity. Now it comes with acceptance. He sits up, places his feet on the floor, and takes a slow breath. One he doesn't realize he's been holding all night. The house knows him well. Every floorboard that creaks, every corner that holds a shadow. It's not an old house, but it feels lived in, shaped by years of presence rather than age. There are no photos on the walls, not because there were never memories worth framing, but because at some point he stopped wanting to look back. In the kitchen, he makes coffee the same way every day. Same mug, same measured movements. The steam rises gently, carrying a familiar scent that fills the room and then disappears just as quietly. He drinks it standing by the window. Outside, the world continues without asking him to join in. Cars pass. A dog barks somewhere down the street. A jogger moves by with headphones in, lost in their own rhythm. He watches, but he doesn't envy them. It's not sadness he feels. Not exactly. It's something softer, heavier. A feeling that settled in over time, like dust, until it became part of the furniture of his life. He goes to work. He does what's expected of him. He speaks when spoken to. He listens more than he talks. People describe him as reliable, calm, private. They say things like, he's solid. You can count on him. And they're right. What they don't see is what counting on yourself for too long can do. At lunch, he eats alone. Not because he has to, but because it's easier. Conversations require energy, and energy is something he's learned to conserve. He scrolls through his phone, not really reading anything, just letting time pass. Sometimes a memory tries to surface. A voice, a place, a moment that doesn't quite fit with the life he's living now. When that happens, he gently pushes it away. Not today, he tells himself. Not now. Evenings are quieter. Dinner is simple. Television on low volume. The same shows he's watched before. Not because they're interesting, but because they don't ask anything of him. He knows how they end. There are no surprises. Later, he sits in a chair near the window, watching the light fade from the sky. This is the part of the day he doesn't talk about, the part that feels suspended between what was and what is. There was a time when someone else used to sit there. The thought comes uninvited, and he stiffens slightly, as if the memory might notice him noticing it. He doesn't go there. He never does. Instead, he stands up and decides to finally do something he's been avoiding for years. The storage room. It's a small space at the back of the house. Nothing dramatic, just boxes, old things, forgotten things. The kind of place where time gets stored away neatly, labeled, and ignored. He tells himself he's only going to organize. Throw a few things out. Clear space, that's all. The light flickers on, revealing cardboard boxes stacked unevenly. Some have labels written in handwriting that looks younger. Others are blank, their contents long since assumed to be unimportant. He kneels down and opens the first box. Old papers, manuals, receipts from places that don't exist anymore. The second box holds clothes he no longer wears. He runs his hand over the fabric, surprised by how familiar it still feels. Then he reaches the third box. It's heavier than the others. Inside are things he hasn't seen in years, objects that carry weight not because of what they are, but because of what they remember. At the bottom of the box, beneath a stack of notebooks, he finds an envelope. It's plain. No stamp, no address. Just his name, written carefully on the front. His hand freezes. He knows that handwriting. The room feels suddenly smaller, as if the walls have leaned in slightly. He sits back on his heels, the envelope resting in his palm like something fragile. He tells himself it's nothing, just an old note, something unfinished, something forgotten for a reason. But his heart has already started to beat differently. He doesn't open it. Not yet. He places it gently on top of the box, stands up, and turns off the light. That night's sleep doesn't come easily. The envelope sits on the kitchen table, untouched. He passes it once, twice. Each time he feels its presence, like a quiet question waiting to be answered. He finally sits down. The house is silent. The clock ticks softly in the background, marking time the way it always has, without emotion, without pause. He picks up the envelope. For a long moment, he just holds it. Some things change your life not when they arrive, but when you finally decide to face them. And as he slides a finger under the edge of the paper, he realizes something he hasn't allowed himself to admit in years. He has been ready for this day longer than he thought. He doesn't open it right away. Instead, he rests the envelope on the table and leans back in the chair, as if distance might soften what's coming. The paper looks thinner than he expected, fragile, time-worn, as though it has been waiting patiently, not aging, just waiting. The house is quiet in a way that feels intentional. Outside, the night has settled fully. No traffic, no voices, just the steady ticking of the clock, reminding him that time has never stopped moving, even when he wished it would. He exhales slowly, then he opens the envelope. The paper inside is folded carefully, once, then again. He recognizes the neatness immediately, the way the corners line up perfectly, the way the handwriting slopes slightly to the right, confident but gentle. He reads the first line and stops, not because he doesn't understand the words, but because he understands them too well. The date at the top of the page catches his eye. It's a date he knows, a date he has spent years avoiding, the day everything fell apart. His grip tightens just a little. The room feels warmer now, or maybe that's just him. He swallows and reads again, slower this time. The letter doesn't begin with anger. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't demand anything. Instead, it begins quietly, almost kindly, as if the person writing it knew this moment would come someday and wanted to make it easier. That's what unsettles him the most. The words pull him backward, gently at first, back to a different version of himself. He remembers that morning. He had woken up late, already annoyed at himself. The sun was brighter than usual, slipping through the curtains with a confidence he didn't share. He rushed through the house, distracted, half listening to the radio, already planning how the day would unfold. There had been a conversation that morning, a short one, too short. He remembers standing near the door, keys in hand, mind elsewhere. He remembers the sound of a voice behind him, asking him to wait, to talk, to stay just a little longer. He remembers saying, "Not today." At the time, it felt reasonable, necessary even. Now, reading the letter, it feels heavy. The writer describes that moment in careful detail, not to shame him, but to capture it. The pause, the look that passed between them, the things left unsaid. He hadn't realized how clearly it had all been remembered. As he reads on, the letter shifts. It talks about the days leading up to that morning, small signs he hadn't noticed, questions he hadn't asked, feelings that had been kept quiet out of fear. Fear of being a burden, fear of making things complicated. His chest tightens. He had thought silence was safer. The letter explains something else too. That day wasn't supposed to be the end. It was supposed to be the beginning of a conversation, one that never happened. He pauses, setting the paper down, pressing his palms flat against the table. His breathing has changed, slower but deeper, as if his body knows this truth before his mind fully accepts it. For years, he had told himself a version of the story that made survival easier, that things ended suddenly, that there was nothing he could have done, that time simply moved forward and left him behind. The letter doesn't argue with him. It just fills in the spaces. It talks about waiting, about hope that faded slowly, not all at once, about checking the phone, then putting it down, about convincing oneself that tomorrow would be better, And then tomorrow came and went. He feels something shift inside him. Not sharp, not painful, just heavy. This wasn't a moment. It was a process, and he had been part of it, even in his absence. The letter's tone remains calm, almost forgiving. That's what makes it harder to read. There's a line halfway down the page that stops him again. It says something simple, something devastating in its honesty. It says, "I didn't need you to fix anything. I just needed you to stay." He closes his eyes. The room fades. The years collapse inward. He is no longer sitting at the kitchen table in the quiet of his house. He is standing in that doorway again, keys in hand, time waiting. And for the first time, he sees the moment not as he remembered it, but as it truly was. A choice, not dramatic, not loud, just a choice to leave instead of listen. His throat tightens, but he keeps reading. The letter moves toward its end, not with resentment, but with understanding. It speaks of acceptance, of learning to move forward without answers, of letting go, not because it was easy, but because holding on hurt more. Near the bottom of the page, the handwriting changes slightly, less controlled, more human. The final lines are not instructions, they are not demands, they are a release. He reaches the end of the letter and sits there, holding the paper, the words echoing in the quiet space around him. This is climax one, though he doesn't know it yet. Because the letter has done something unexpected. It hasn't reopened an old wound, it has reframed it. And in doing so, it has placed a new question in his hands. Not about the past, but about what he will do now that he finally understands it. He doesn't move right away. The letter rests in his hands, lighter than it should feel for something carrying so much weight. The words linger in the air, as if the room itself has memorized them. He folds the paper slowly, carefully, as though speed might damage what's already fragile. For years, he believed understanding would hurt more than ignorance. Now he's not so sure. He stands and walks to the window, holding the letter loosely at his side. Outside, the street looks the same as it always has. Still, familiar, unaware. It's strange how the world refuses to reflect what's happening inside a person. He had built his life on a single assumption, that the ending had been sudden, that there had been no warning, that the distance between them had appeared overnight, without explanation. The letter quietly dismantles that story, and in its place, something more complicated begins to form. He thinks back to that time again, but this time, he doesn't rush through it. He lets the memories slow down. He allows details to surface that he once dismissed as unimportant. The missed calls, the longer pauses between conversations, the way questions were asked gently, then not at all. He had been proud of how composed he was back then, how he didn't overreact, how he kept things simple. He realizes now that simplicity had been another name for avoidance. The letter had mentioned waiting. That word echoes in him. Waiting implies hope, and hope implies belief, that things could still be different. He sits back down, unfolding the letter again, scanning lines he's already read. This time he notices something he missed before, a reference to a conversation he doesn't remember having, a specific one, a day, a place. He frowns slightly. He remembers being there, but not what was said. That bothers him. Memory is a strange thing. It keeps what we repeat and discards what we refuse to face. He had repeated his own version of events so many times that it had overwritten everything else. He thinks he knows what comes next in the letter. But when he reads on, he realizes there's more. A second page. He hadn't noticed it before. The handwriting is the same, but the tone is different. Less composed, more exposed. This part wasn't written for clarity. It was written because it had to be written. This page talks about something he never knew. A decision that had already been made before that final morning. Not about leaving, but about staying if something changed. His breath catches slightly. The letter explains that the conversation he postponed wasn't a plea. It was a boundary, a final attempt to be honest about what was needed. Not perfection, not certainty, just presence. And when he walked out that door, keys in hand, saying, "Not today," something shifted quietly on the other side of the silence. Not anger, not bitterness, acceptance. He leans back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, the weight of it pressing down on him in a way he can't ignore anymore. All these years, he had believed he was the one left behind. But the truth is more uncomfortable. They both were, just at different times. The letter doesn't say this directly. It doesn't blame him. It doesn't absolve him either. It simply lays the moment bare and lets him see it clearly. He had thought love ended when someone walked away. Now he understands that sometimes it ends when someone stops waiting. He runs a hand across his face, feeling the roughness of stubble, grounding himself in the present. His body feels older in this moment, not weak, just aware, aware of time, of cost. There's another line near the bottom of the second page that stays with him. It says, "I don't want you to carry this like a punishment. I just want you to carry it honestly." He exhales slowly. Honesty. That was always the hardest part. He had been honest about what he did, about where he went, about how life moved on. But he had never been honest about why. Why it was easier to leave than to stay. Why silence felt safer than vulnerability. Why he convinced himself that distance meant dignity. The letter doesn't demand change, it invites reflection, and reflection, he's learning, can be more unsettling than guilt. He folds the letter again and places it back on the table, aligning it carefully with the edge. His hands move with intention now, not avoidance. This is climax 2, though it arrives without drama. The realization that the story he's lived with for years was incomplete, that the pain he carried wasn't caused by a single moment, but by a pattern. And that understanding, this doesn't undo the past, but it does change what comes next. He sits there for a long time after that. He sits there for a long time after that. No tears, no breakdown, just a quiet reckoning. For the first time in years, the weight he carries feels defined, named, and somehow that makes it lighter. Because what we understand, we can finally choose how to live with. Morning arrives without ceremony. Light slips through the window, softer than usual, as if the day understands it shouldn't rush him. He wakes on the couch, the weight of the night still resting quietly in his chest. For a brief moment, he forgets about the letter. Then he sees it, still on the table, exactly where he left it. Nothing about it has changed, and yet everything has. He sits up slowly, his body stiff, his mind unusually clear. There's no panic this morning, no urge to escape the feeling. Just a steady awareness, like standing at the edge of something important and knowing you can't turn back. Not because you're trapped, but because you're ready. He makes coffee, though he barely tastes it. His movements are slower now, deliberate. He carries the mug to the chair near the window and sits, letting the warmth settle into his hands. Forgiveness had always sounded simple when other people talked about it. A decision, a release, a clean ending. But sitting here, in the quiet of his own life, he realizes forgiveness isn't something you grant once and move on from. It's something you return to, again and again, until it finally holds. For years, he thought forgiveness meant letting someone else off the hook. Now he understands that the hardest part was never forgiving them. It was forgiving himself. He had lived as though regret was a form of responsibility, as though carrying it proved something, that he cared, that he understood, that he paid his dues. Letting go felt like betrayal, like rewriting the past into something kinder than it deserved. But the letter never asked him to forget. It asked him to be honest. He stands and walks to the storage room again, the place where the letter had waited all this time. This time, he turns on the light without hesitation. The room looks the same, but it feels different. Less like a place of avoidance, more like a place of record. He opens another box. Inside are notebooks he once wrote in, years ago. He flips through pages filled with plans, unfinished thoughts, lists of things he thought mattered at the time. He notices how confident his handwriting used to be, how certain. He realizes something quietly without judgment. He had been doing the best he could with the understanding he had back then. That doesn't erase the impact, but it does change the meaning. He sits on the floor, notebook in hand, and allows himself to write again. Not to explain, not to justify, but to acknowledge. He writes about the fear he never named, the vulnerability he avoided, the way silence had seemed like strength. He writes about the cost. And then, for the first time, he writes about the possibility of living differently. The house feels less heavy as the day goes on. Not lighter in a joyful way, lighter in an honest one. Like setting something down after realizing you've been carrying it far longer than necessary. In the afternoon, he takes a walk. He hasn't done that in years without a destination, without a reason. He walks slowly, noticing details he usually passes without thought. The sound of leaves, the unevenness of the sidewalk, the way the air feels against his skin. Time no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like something he still has. As evening approaches, he returns home and sits at the table once more. He takes out the letter, reading the final lines again. They land differently now. Less like a reckoning, more like a companion. This is the final climax, though it arrives quietly. The moment he understands that the purpose of the letter was never to reopen the past, but to free the future from it. He folds the letter carefully and places it back in the envelope. This time, he doesn't hide it away. He places it in a drawer he opens often, not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder of truth. That night, as he turns off the lights and prepares for bed, something subtle shifts. The silence no longer feels heavy. It feels open. He lies down and closes his eyes, not expecting sleep to come easily. But it does. Not deep, not perfect, but real. Tomorrow won't undo yesterday, but tomorrow will be lived differently. And sometimes that's enough. And maybe, somewhere in your own life, there's a letter you've never opened, a moment you've never allowed yourself to face, or a truth you've been carrying quietly. If this story spoke to you, if it echoed something real inside your own heart, then you're not alone. Thank you for listening to Echoes of Life Stories, where real emotions, real lives, and real moments are given the time they deserve. If you felt something tonight, take a moment to like this story and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. New stories are always waiting, and sometimes the one you need most finds you right when you're ready to listen.